Hey guys, this is Brian Rosner. When you live in an RV, it's pretty hard to have a good backdrop, so I'm sorry, but we could pick my daughter's drawings over there or the messy kitchen. But anyway, um, I thought of an interesting analogy today to explain something that I've noticed with mold illness. And imagine if you were at the zoo and all of the animals, the gorillas, the bears, the lions, the alligators, they all had zebra stripes, every one of them. And they were all gathering at lunchtime. Let's just say they hang out and the predators and the prey are nice to each other. And they all are confused about what they are. And the alligator's like, well, I have scales and teeth, but I have zebra stripes. So am I a zebra or am I an alligator? And the elephant's like, I'm big like an elephant, but I have zebra stripes. So what am I? Am I a zebra or an elephant? And, the giraffe is like, I'm tall like a giraffe and I have a long neck, but I have zebra stripes. And it kind of goes back to one thing that Eric Johnson said when he was in the army. There was some really toxic mold that hit his barracks, his unit, his soldiers, and what seemed to happen was the toxic mold manifested in all of his friends and colleagues differently. Some of them got sick with this thing, and some of them got sick with that thing, and some of them, sometimes the illnesses that manifested were totally different, completely unrelated. And what Eric realized was that mold sort of brings out the worst in you. Whatever's already going on in your body, whatever's weak, maybe some underlying infection, or whatever's wrong with you, because none of us are perfect, right? None of us are perfectly healthy. Mold sort of makes that worse. So basically, the way, when I come back to my zoo analogy, it's like the zebra stripes are the mold. All of the animals, real animals are healthy, but let's just pretend that these animals have a mold illness, just so that you can use my analogy to figure out what this concept is. If we just assume that all of these zoo animals have mold illness, they all have zebra stripes, which is the mold illness, right? That's the thing they have in common. But everything else about them is different. So there's going to be some arguments about what they actually are. And this happens in the chronic illness community too. I have friends online, really smart researchers who do this almost for a living. Some of them do it for a living. And we argue all the time. Do you have Lyme disease? No, I don't have Lyme disease. I have chronic fatigue syndrome. Oh, well, I think I have Lyme disease. Oh, well, no, you don't. You have heavy metal toxicity. Oh, no, you don't have heavy metal toxicity. You must have this. Oh, no, you don't have this. And we argue and argue, and I keep wondering, like, why are we smart people arguing about this? Why can't we just accept that we're different and that we have different things wrong with our bodies? It's funny. No one else argues with this. I mean, if you have a broken leg, no one's going to come up to you and say, you don't have a broken leg, you have the flu. Right? It's just, it doesn't make sense, but it's confusing because we all share this one underlying thing, and that's the underlying cause of mold illness that then makes everything else worse. So we have these things in common. We tell each other, oh, well, I react to mold, and I've gotten better by doing mold avoidance, and I've gotten better by detoxing mold. So we have this one thing in common, and that makes our brains think that we should have everything else in common. Because if your neighbor down the street has the flu and your neighbor on your other side of you is coughing and has a fever, you might think, oh, they both have the flu, right? Well, we have these things in common, sort of. We have this underlying thing in common, but then it changes from there. And it's really important to understand this because one of the things that I've learned in the last 15 months of doing mold avoidance is that I actually think that Lyme disease is sort of trivial, and when I say trivial, I don't take that lightly because I know Borrelia is a very formidable foe, but I think that a lot of people have mold as a deeper problem, and some people are going to not get Lyme disease when they have mold. They're going to get chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, a lot of other manifestations of mold illness. So I think it's important that we understand this concept, because it's going to help you make sense of what you see on the internet and in discussion forums a lot more, because a lot of these people are going to be coming together in discussion groups, and they're going to be having this one primary thing in common. Now, if you personally have Lyme disease, I'm not saying Lyme disease is fake. Lyme disease is extremely real. Lyme disease and co-infections can kill you and can destroy your body, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that the reason they get so out of control is the same reason that so many other conditions get out of control, which is the underlying issue of mold. And so if you have Lyme disease and your Lyme disease is out of control, or it's not as calm and in remission as you would like it to be, it's going to take a little bit of work for you to determine if mold is the underlying cause. I think in most cases of Lyme disease, mold probably is the underlying cause. And I don't want to get into which came first, the chicken or the egg. Maybe Borrelia made you more sensitive to mold in the first place, or maybe mold made you more sensitive to Borrelia. The reason that I think that mold is the underlying issue and Lyme disease isn't, and this takes a little bit of inductive reasoning here, right? We can't do deductive reasoning because we don't have all the facts. We have to do inductive reasoning, which is where we have some of the facts and then we have to make a conclusion that seems probable. And the reason I think that mold is the probable underlying cause is because all of these people with different problems all share mold as an underlying cause. We've seen this, and when they treat the mold illness, all of the other stuff gets better. It's not the other way around. When they treat the higher level problems, the Lyme disease, the chronic fatigue syndrome, they don't get better. They might get a little better. It's only when they treat mold that they start to really knock off the pieces of this puzzle. And so inductive reasoning then would tell us that mold is a higher level on the hierarchy. It's a bigger problem. It's a foundational problem, and the other problems built on top of that are only there because of the foundation. So if you have Lyme disease and you aren't sure if mold is an issue for you, that's a very common problem to have. Lyme disease can sort of take center stage and block everything out, and you really have a hard time getting to the mold layer. I actually didn't get to the mold layer for 20 years. And one of the reasons is that mold can be very sneaky, especially if you're surrounded by it and it's in your environment and your body is full of it. The times you can sense mold the best and recognize it as your problem is when it's the lowest in your body. Because at that point, good things start to happen and your body starts to heal. And then if a little more mold comes in, you go backwards, and then you can detox the mold and you get better. You sense the ebb and flow. But when you're full of mold and your environment there's never any changes. There's never anything to compare to. There's no contrast. So one of the things that is really needed in order to tell how much mold is involved in your sickness is to lower the level of mold in your body. And you can do that by doing a mold avoidance sabbatical, which I've explained in a lot of my other videos. I don't want to just keep boring you with the same information. So watch some of my other videos if you don't know what that is. I personally do not believe that that the mold treatments that are being advocated right now by most modern mold and Lyme doctors are really enough to do this. When I was still living in a moldy environment, even though I had taken some efforts to remediate and get clear of mold, I still was never able to lower the mold enough that I was able to notice this. So what I ultimately had to do was to be more extreme about how to go about lowering the mold. And for me, a mold avoidance sabbatical an unintentional one, actually. You can read about that in my book and watch it in some of my videos. And ozone therapy. Those were the two things that allowed me to lower the mold enough that I could start to tell what was going on. So, I think that many people watching this, probably, if they take the right steps, they will unpeel the layers and they'll realize that Lyme disease is just incidental. It's just a trivial problem that's on top of mold. And by trivial, again, it still can be a bullet to the head. It's not that it's not damaging. Lyme disease can still be a bullet to the head in a lot of ways, but it's trivial in its effects if you eliminate the mold. And mold can be difficult to eliminate. I'm not going to address that in this video. That's pretty much all I'm talking about these days, so you can find it in my other resources. But, so in conclusion to this video, there's a lot of chronic illness confusion right now of the elephants and the alligators and the lions with zebra stripes. And once we realize that the zebra stripes are mold illness and that that's why they all have them, then it helps us out a lot when we're on discussion forums online or we're talking to our doctor. And this may help you. People with Lyme disease say, I have mold. Or people with mold say, I have Lyme disease, right? Well, I think that it's important to know that the mold component is a deeper component. The Lyme can only get as out of control as the mold gets. It's not the other way around. So that's, something. And, when I was detoxing mold, I still had to treat the Lyme disease a lot. The mold helped, but, Lyme disease for me didn't just automatically go away. But the more that I detoxed the mold, the easier it became to get Lyme disease under control. So anyway, I was just having a debate with my friend tonight, and she's a very knowledgeable person in this community, and we were arguing about is it heavy metals, is it infections, is it mold, is it genetics? It's hard to know exactly what got the ball rolling in the wrong direction, right? Was it gene snips, detox genes going haywire? Was it environment? How come grandma and grandpa who are 80 years old and smoke their whole life and live in a moldy house are healthy? Or at least they're healthy enough. They enjoy their life and they're 80 years old. We have relatives that are like that. I don't know. I don't know that we're going to know what the trigger is in our generation or what the trigger is with mold sick people. Is it a new infection that our grandma and grandpa didn't deal with? Is it a new vaccine that we had when we were babies? Is it a new ointment that they put on us when we were babies at the hospital? I don't know what screwed us up and made us susceptible to this. But once things are screwed up, I don't know that question really matters. Unscrewing things is the harder thing. Like if you have a multi-car pileup on the freeway and a semi hits a car and it slides across the median and flips over, when the police get there, it doesn't really matter how it happened, right? It doesn't matter that Bob was drunk and took his eyes off of the road and ran into Susie. Like by the time the officers and the ambulances get there, what really matters is who's in the most danger. Let's help them first. Is there gasoline on the road that needs to be cleaned up? So I think that people with this problem, mold illness, by the time they start reacting to mold and having mold toxicity, it's like the multi-car pileup on the freeway that, the damage has already been done. The fire is there, the injured people are there. So yes, it's important to say, how did this accident happen? But I think it's much more important to look at what fire needs to be put out first and which person needs to be rescued first. I realize it's kind of a rough analogy, but you get my point, that I don't really want us to get really tied up in the question of why did this happen and what came first. I just think that I don't think we'll know. I don't think we know right now. And I know there's a lot of people that want to start getting better now without full knowledge of why they're sick. And this has always been a discrepancy with the research community. Eric Johnson's extreme mold avoidance, a lot of people reject it because there haven't been clinical trials or there haven't been, whatever. But people want to get better, and mold avoidance works. And so, I have my theories about why mold avoidance works, but they're not proven, but it still works. One of my theories about why mold avoidance works is that there are these stealth infections in our body, and they may be different for different people. Some of them may be Lyme and co-infections. Some of them may be viruses. Some of them probably are underlying, a very root cause, I believe, is worms and underlying worm infections, not just in the gut, but systemic. And I believe that this mold acts as like a biofilm and even food for these worms. And these worms are able to use this mold as fuel. And there's studies about this. Someone was supposed to say in the forums all these studies about how worms actually eat fungus, and there's like this weird symbiotic relationship. It's a very sci-fi type of situation. And so by the time we start to react to mold, the worms are so out of control in our body that we are like in touch with what they're doing. And so I think that by doing mold avoidance, we are essentially starving these life forms of their survival, and then they become weaker, and our immune system can attack them over time. And one example is I have done multiple parasite drugs and cleanses over 20 years, but none of them did anything until mold avoidance. So mold avoidance somehow sets up these creatures to be weakened. And so I think that's maybe sort of getting at the root of what's happening here, that there are some types of creatures that are keeping us sick, that mold is helping them. I think that's a much more root level than Lyme disease or viruses or, candida or whatever. Now, I'm not saying that I have evidence for that, and I'm not saying that that's proven. That's just what I have observed and what I believe to be the case. But what I actually do have evidence for is that people get better with mold avoidance. They do get better, and things become easier to manage. So anyway, I just wanted to clear up a little bit of the confusion about the zebra stripes on all of the chronic illness patients out there right now having mold in common, but so many different manifestations of it. It's because there's two things happening. There's the mold, and then there's whatever the person has wrong in their body that the mold makes worse. So it can get a little confusing, because if you try to connect the two, that's where you get lost. If you say, my Epstein-Barr virus is out of control, and I have mold, therefore mold always causes Epstein-Barr virus to get out of control. And then you look at somebody with Lyme disease and you say, you must have out of control Epstein-Barr virus because we know you have mold. And then you start arguing, no, I don't have Epstein-Barr virus, I have Bartonella. No, you don't, because I have mold and I have Epstein-Barr virus. This is where people get confused. You have to separate them. The person over there may have Bartonella, the person over there may have Epstein-Barr virus, but the link between the people is mold is what allowed it to get out of control in the first place. And so you have to separate the mold from the other problems. And this is what Eric noticed, was that, and this is why all the researchers and doctors got confused, because they weren't smart enough and inquisitive enough to think this through. They just saw, oh, all the people who were exposed to mold ended up with this flu that never went away. Therefore, the flu must be the problem. And so they all only looked at the flu. They didn't realize that there was some underlying thing that caused that to get worse, that there was actually very definable groups of people in Eric's hometown that had been exposed to this super bad mold, and they were the ones that developed this flu that never went away. And so the researchers just saw the flu that never went away, and they said that must be the problem. But they were stupid. I hate to say it, but they didn't think it through and really research the evidence. But we see this all the time, right? I mean, we see, research just completely failing us all the time. So anyway, I hope this video has helped clear up for you a little bit of how mold can manifest so differently, and why it's confusing, and I think there's a lot of practical implications of this information. When you use treatments, now you may understand why they help and why they do what they do. And when you do mold detox and mold avoidance, you'll understand what's happening. So anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry this video's so ridiculous here in my trailer, but this is where a lot of my insights have been happening, you guys, because I'm doing extreme mold avoidance in a travel trailer. I'm really starving whatever these life forms are of their mold, and I'm noticing all these profound lessons that were not apparent to me when I was living even around small amounts of mold that were keeping this vicious cycle going. So, even though these videos are very casual, I think I have some insights to share with you that you won't find anywhere else. You won't find them by people who are looking in laboratories. You won't find them by doctors because they're in, offices that have some level of mold. You really have to go get clear. Eric has coined this phrase, you get clear, and then you start realizing that all this stuff is true. Eric spent a lot of time in very clear locations. He had a converted cargo trailer that was made out of just metal and styrofoam, and he was extremely careful not to bring mold into it. And then everything came into focus for him. What's going on? Why is it happening? But since nobody goes to the trouble of doing that, and there's all these people that are literally on their deathbeds right now dying of different, chronic illnesses, no one understands this stuff. So I feel like that's why I have some of these insights. It's not because I'm smarter than anyone else. It's because I've taken the trouble to put some faith in Eric's approach to do extreme mold avoidance, not just in the trailer environment, but also my outdoor air. I'm in a very pristine area that doesn't have a lot of outdoor super toxins and mold. And so if you go to the trouble of doing this, a lot of people will have the same observations. It's not like I'm special. I don't have any special insight into this. I'm just doing the hard work, and it is hard work to do mold avoidance so that I am able to perceive these things. You can do it too. Anyone can do it. And it's profound. Let me tell you, when you've been sick for a long time, you get healthier doing this, and you see your body strengthen. And we were just talking about on the forum how all kinds of symptoms and problems melt away. Like one interesting example is cold intolerance. Even when I was in remission from Lyme disease, but more so when I was really sick with Lyme disease, I couldn't tolerate the cold. The slightest breeze of cold would just make me cringe. And even when it got a little better, I still didn't tolerate the cold. I used to always see my neighbor snow blowing outside in 30 degrees in a t-shirt. And I was like, who could do that? That would kill me. Well, guess what? I'm that guy now. I only have one little space heater on in here, and it's 54 degrees. It's 54 degrees in my trailer right now, and I'm in a t-shirt. And I'm like, it's like I'm a normal person now. I'm a little chilly, but it doesn't really bother me. I go outside and I do chores here in the mountains of New Mexico, in a t-shirt. And of course, I'm not Superman. Like, I could die of hypothermia just like anyone else. But mold avoidance has allowed my body to thermoregulate, and there's all these little changes you start to see, and you start to put the pieces together of how mold does this. And so that cold tolerance is just one example. There's a lot of other examples that I could just list, the way that my body is normalizing. And some people can be normal in mold, like my buddy who's down the street who snowblows with his t-shirt on. For some reason, he's not as susceptible to mold toxicity, and he can live in a moldy house. But there's something different about mold illness patients where we cannot do that. And I don't know, again, it goes back to the car accident. I don't know what the cause is. I don't know if Susie was looking at her phone when she crashed. I don't know if Bob was drunk. But for whatever reason, mold illness patients are like these freeway pileups that it is what it is. And we don't need to sit around and argue about it. It is what it is. And we can have theories about why mold avoidance works, but it does work. Okay, I'm going to end this video at 25 minutes here. Hope it's been worth it for you guys to watch this. Just a disclaimer, I am not a doctor. This is just my own personal opinion and experience. Consult your doctor for medical advice. Thanks a lot.